So in the previous video, we talked about using some of the built-in aggregate functions as well as using the .aggregate method, which takes in a function as a parameter to actually be able to make custom aggregations. And up to this point in our journey with Python, both in prep and in pre-course, it's likely that we haven't really seen many functions or methods that take in some other function as a parameter. And while a lot of the times, as in the example that we saw previously, we can use some sort of pre-built or pre-written function from a module and pass that in as a parameter, if we're defining these functions from scratch and it's unlikely that we're going to be using them over and over, we might turn to something that we call a lambda function. And whereas a regular function that we see here, I have this function called add them, is named, it takes up some space in memory. Python, the interpreter, actually goes through and makes sure that there aren't any errors in this before the code is actually executed. You might find that sometimes you define a function, you don't even invoke that function, and you'll get a syntax error. That's the Python interpreter going through, and as it's saving that function to memory and it has a name, it's actually checking that all of the syntax is correct. And there are times when it's unnecessary. We're only going to use a function one time. We're actually going to usually use it inside of another function, and it's not particularly important for us to actually save that function at all. So I'm going to have an example of this where, first of all, let's just see how the syntax of a lambda function works. We're not going to employ this in a way where it's executable. I just want you to see the structure of a lambda function. But we are first going to call out the keyword lambda. You can see that it has the same syntax highlighting as def, indicating that there is some sort of function coming in the pipeline. And the next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to put in the set of parameters that are taken in by this function. In this case, we have used x, y, a, and z, and then there is a colon. Now, what comes after that colon is actually what we want to return. And in this case, we're just taking a sum of x, y, and z. So that is actually what I will want to return as well. And right, this is the lambda form of the function. You can see that it is a little bit less descriptive, whereas a typical function typically takes up several lines. A lambda function is usually written to only take up one line. You'll also notice that it doesn't have a name, and that is because it is strictly temporary. We are going to use this function one time, and then we are going to throw it away. We're not going to commit it to the memory of the computer for future use. So this is sort of what the general structure of a lambda function is, but let's actually see what we can't do to see a lambda function actually in progress, right? Sort of working. So again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write some function. It's going to take in a list as a parameter, and from that list, or excuse me, it's not going to take in a list. Let's build it. It's going to take in a tuple, although that's not particularly important as, let's call it my tuple. It's not particularly important whether it's a list or a tuple, because the syntax that we're going to use here would work for either. But to return the second object in this object, my tuple, I would simply use the square brackets. And if I go ahead and give myself some sort of data structure where this is going to be useful, right, I might be talking about a list of tuples where each tuple has two values, and I want to sort, I'm going to want to sort in place using the sort function, but I actually want to define a key here. And here, I'm going to use our function second, right, to tell me how I want this sorted, right? And what this should do when I print A is this interior function that defines my key should take the second item from each tuple, the item in the first index as defined by the function, and then it will sort the list based on using that as the key. So let me go ahead and save this file. I am going to move over to my terminal here, and I will Python 3, and we'll go delete me 2.py, and we'll go ahead and execute this. And if we look, right, we have 9, 1, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 2, 7. And we can see that those items are in ascending order based on the second value in each of those tuples. Now, the issue with this is that if I was someone coming in behind a person who has written this code, and I didn't have this second function right in front of me, I might not know exactly what this function does. So it might make a little bit more sense for me to actually use a Lambda function here, and that way I could save memory, save time in having to make this function definition, and also make it so this code is a little bit more self-explanatory. So in this case, where I have the name of my first function, second, I'm going to go ahead and actually, I don't want to just overwrite this. I am going to comment it out instead, and then we will write a new line, and in this new line, I will say that my key is now going to be equal to lambda, and as I mentioned, we are going to have some sort of input parameter, much like my tuple the second function had an input parameter and returned the first index from that. I'm going to do the same thing with my lambda function. So here we can see that we're actually doing the same thing, but we are doing a little bit explicitly. And maybe there might be a missing piece of the puzzle here, that when we actually invoke a function as the key in the dot sort method for a list, it passes each item of each object of the list into that function that we define as the key. So in this case, each tuple inside of this list will be represented by x in my lambda function. It was represented by my tuple in my function second. And we should see the exact same result here, right? And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have this saved. I'm going to jump over to my terminal. I'm going to run this file again. And I can see that my print statement, I do have the exact same result. I have this list of tuples, and I have sorted by the second item in that tuple. So this is a little bit of an introduction of using a function as a parameter in general, and also how we might want to do that with a lambda function. You're going to see how this is very necessary and powerful when we actually talk about using the dot filter or the transformation, the dot transform methods on the data frame dot group by in pandas. I look forward to seeing you over in the next video.